morning, everybody, and welcome. I'd like to jump right into this and start by introducing our first speaker of Take Back Kentucky. Please welcome Norm Davis.
Well, as you just saw in the other building, I'm quick on the words, so I'm not going to eat up your time. But I want to tell you something. We just saw one reason why we need Phil Harmon. He would not be for a constitutional convention. He's not beat around the bush about it. He has a good paper on himself. He will be with us on our Second Amendment rights. And I can't think of anything we don't agree on. And the man's intelligent enough that the first time he came to a meeting, I asked him if he'd read a hemp report where we could create, what, 70, 80,000, 100,000 jobs. He promised he'd read it, and guess what? He read it. And I get phone calls from people in Lexington, you got to turn on WVLK because Mr. Harmon read that report.
Mr. Moffett.
Oh, I'm sorry, Moffett. Yes, I apologize. He's got a good running mate named Harmon, though. But anyways, I am proud to say that Take Back Kentucky has endorsed Phil Moffett and Mike Harmon for governor and lieutenant governor. And Phil, come on up.
I can't tell you how much the endorsement from Take Back Kentucky means to our campaign. It's a big boost forward. They're a great liberty group. They do an awesome job of keeping track of what happens in these hallowed halls and making sure that our protections and our liberties are fought for, and thank God for Take Back Kentucky. Now, ladies and gentlemen, all of us want government to stop overspending and put us in debt. Is that right?
Yeah.
Today, Rand Paul was in front of a Senate committee trying to convince our legislature to push for a constitutional convention. Now, he hopes to get some type of amendment to the federal Constitution to keep them from overspending and operating on an unbalanced budget. And that desire is admirable, but that's the wrong way to get that done, folks. There's too much risk involved. A constitutional convention cannot be limited in scope. And the thought of people like Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid and Barney Frank having the opportunity to maybe even eliminate the Bill of Rights or change the Constitution from a document that protects us from the federal government to one that takes away our individual rights, quite frankly, just scares the heck out of me. And we cannot afford to let that happen. Now, as proof as how this can go wrong, I want to hold up Kentucky's Constitution. We have a provision in our Constitution that says that we have to have a balanced budget. We have a provision in our Constitution that says if the state government wants to borrow more than $500 million, they have to get voters' permission. Now, let's look at how well that's worked out for us over the last 10 years. In the year 2000, we had roughly $3.4 billion worth of bonded debt, and our public employee pension plan was $500 million overfunded. But if you fast forward 10 years, we have $10 billion worth of bonded debt now, and our public employee pension plan is $34 billion underfunded. Now, how can this be? How can we have added roughly $7 billion with each new budget cycle that has come across? $7 billion worth of new debt with each one of those cycles. Well, here's how it happens. A balanced budget to the government does not mean the same thing as it does to me as a business person or to you as a family member. To us, it means we can't spend more money than we bring in. But to them, it means something completely different. To them, it means if they can project enough revenue to cover the increase in debt service, then they can borrow as much money as they want in a budget cycle and declare the budget balanced. Now, that's no different, folks, than some guy standing in an electronics store looking at a $17,000 big screen TV he can't afford and trying to figure out if he can handle the increase in the monthly payment on his credit card. Now, only in government Can a balanced budget mean that you can borrow as much money as you want, as long as you think you're going to have enough revenue to pay it back? Now, we also have another part of our budget that requires the legislature to ask our permission to borrow more than $500 million. Why hasn't that kicked in to protect us? And the reason is this: it only applies to something called a general obligation bond. And there hasn't been a general obligation bond issued since 1966. And the reason it hasn't been issued is the legislators came up with a new definition for a bond called an agency bond. So they could issue them instead of general obligation bonds to skirt that constitutional protection and bury us in additional debt. Now, I find it quite ironic that David Williams, who was my chief opponent in the primary, was sitting with Dr. Paul earlier today asking the federal government to change the Constitution to include a balanced budget amendment, when in fact he has piled tens of millions or tens of billions worth of debt on our children and grandchildren with each of these budget cycles, and we need to pay attention to what we're doing at home, not what they're doing up in Washington, D.C. right now.